Okay, so we have the four colors that we chose. Squeezing them out. And remember I talked about the 4x4 grid to help us decide what color is going to be doing what. So we get the whole range of colors. So if we look here, we have violet. And violet's already very dark. Green is the next darkest, followed by red, and then yellow being the lightest. So those are their natural values already, given straight out the tube. Notice that violet and green are practically black as far as you could probably tell on the camera. You know, they're so already very dark that you're going to have to add white just to get them to look different from each other. All right. And in terms of the intensities, all these colors are considered at this point high intensity. Straight out the tube is a high intensity. So to drop the intensities, there are two ways we can go about doing that. One is to use the complementary color. So that means the opposite color that we see on the color wheel. So the complementary color of violet is yellow and vice versa. The complementary color of red is green and vice versa. All right? So if you look on the color wheel, red's on one side, the opposite side would be green. Violet's on one side, the opposite side would be yellow. All right? You can mix those colors into each other in small, subtle quantities, and that will drop the intensity. Or you can mix grays into the color. So for the first part of the semester, it's okay to just mix up some grays. And that could be a shortcut for you exploring, what gray plus a tint looks like. And that's a valid color use. But when we get further into the color charts, we're going to explore mixing up neutral colors strictly using complementary colors. So without the black and white. So one way you can do it is take some black and some white. And we'll start to mix up a number of different grays. So let's see if we can get closer here to see more what I'm doing. Alright, so we'll take a little bit of black, some white, and mix up the gray. A little bit of black, some white. Let's just get all this. Need a little bit more. Mix it up till you see no streaks in the color anymore. Get it thoroughly mixed. Alright, so we're trying to get the full range of color here. Wipe off your knife when you need to, so it's clean again. Let's grab some more white. Take some of this color. Start adding a second amount of white into it. Get some more white. So we see we're getting progressively lighter here. And then let's just take a blob of white and use the dirty palette knife and get that last stage of gray. Alright, so we don't want to use direct black, so I'm just going to lighten up the black a little bit. Get a little bit of white in there, essentially creating a dark gray. Alright, so one way to create your colors would be to mix up these 4 stages of gray. So dark, the dark light, or the light dark, excuse me, the dark light, and then the light. And then you can mix your tint into each one of those. Alright, so here we have our color. So let's say you can mix red into each one of those and get 4 different intensities of red and values. Yellow will do the same, green and violet. Alright, so like the violet and the black, you're not going to notice much difference, right? You're going to kind of hide the color. If it's already a dark color, you don't need to add the black. You would more add the lighter grays. So first let's decide what color, what we want where. And let's populate our chart how we'd like. So we don't want to just do the obvious because we want you to explore color. At least not every time. Every now and then you could choose something that's obvious, but let's say we want the yellow to be not in the light position because it already is. So let's make the yellow the dark light, but let's make it a high. So we'll do yellow here, and then red, which was this position before in terms of value. Let's make the red the light color. Oh no, let's do the violet the light color actually. And let's put the violet here. Then let's say red is going to go here, and then the last location is green. Alright, so nobody's sharing columns and rows with any other color. You see that how that works. We're looking for these positions, trying to mix these colors. So let's set that aside over here. You can see that still. Alright, so the first color we're working with here, a dark light yellow. So yellow is already light, and it's a high intensity. So high intensity means straight out the tube, it's already high intensity. So what do we have to do to it? We just need to darken it a little bit. So we can take some of this black, just a small amount. Just got the smallest amount on there. And let's mix that into the yellow. That's going to darken up our yellow. so I think we'll set that as aside for now. Might have to go a little darker, but for now we'll say that's gotten to the dark light. So now we need to lighten, look at the light color. We're going to have violet as our light color. So we're going to take all this white and just a touch of that purple, this violet. And this violet needs to be lighter than the yellow. And so we might need some more white. And we're going to create a color that's lighter than the yellow. But it's got a little drop in intensity, right? So we have the low high for intensity chosen for the violet. So that means we need to just drop that intensity just a little bit. Put this here so you can see those. So how do we drop the intensity of this violet? Well, we could add a little bit of this light gray to it. It's one way. Or we could add some of this yellow to it. I'm going to go ahead and just add a little bit of this yellow to it. Now the color should still look like a violet to you. If you added too much yellow, then you might need to throw back in a little more violet. So it should still look like a purple to you, but a less intense purple, slowly moving toward gray. Right, so maybe I'll just add just the slightest bit of purple back in there. So now we have a violet that's lighter than the yellow, but less intense than that yellow. Right, so it's moving down. The next color is the red. So it's a light dark red and a high low intensity. So clean off your palette knife, get it clean again. Make sure there's nothing else on there. Alright, so now we're ready for the red. Grab some of this red, just getting kind of thick. And high-low value and the light dark. So we need to darken the red a little bit and drop its intensity. So this time I'm going to try the gray. I'm going to choose this gray. So it's not the darkest gray, which would be the dark column. We're going to see what this red does. Here, I'm going to darken up that red, drop its intensity with the addition of white and black. You could have done this also by just adding green to the red. But it's important that the red is darker than the yellow. And if your red is too dark, you might have to lighten it up just a little bit. But first let's see what happens with the green before we decide if the red is too dark or not. So again, clean off your palette. Last color on our chart is green. It's a low intensity and it's a dark. So at this point, we look at the green. Does it appear darker than the red? Just barely. So let's see if when we drop the intensity, if that's going to change the green. So let's choose some of this red. And we're gonna a fairly decent chunk of red to this amount of green, because we're trying to drop its intensity pretty low. Get it as close to neutral as we can get while keeping it a green. Alright, so you notice how it got so dark now, it's practically a black. Anytime you mix colors, they always darken. So you can always pretty much count on needing to add white to keep your colors in the visible range when you're working on some of these dark tones. So yes, it's dark, but that doesn't mean we want to go full black. We want to keep it into perceptible range. Right, so let's get a little bit of this light gray, mix that in there, and see if it still appears green enough. So if it's not green enough, let's just add a little bit more green. We want to keep this color where it's visibly obvious that it's green, but it's going to be a low intensity dark green. So practically a gray. But it should feel like a gray green to you. Alright, so now let's take a look at our colors and see how they compare to the chart that we planned. Alright, so we have our dark green, which should be a low intensity. I think that looks pretty good. Clean out my brush with some water. Then we have our red, which is slightly higher intensity, slightly lighter. Okay, so let's just go ahead paint those right next to each other so we can compare them side by side. The next is our yellow, which was a dark light. And the last color was our violet, which should be the lightest color. Alright, so looks like we got the values right. This is the lightest value, and it gets slightly darker, then darkest. Right? If anything, you might want to say that that red and the green are too close to each other in terms of value. So let's lighten up that red just a little bit. So I'm going to add some white to my red. You want to keep it dark, darker than the yellow, but visibly no lighter than the green. So I add a little bit of white to that red mixture, and let's try that again. So paint over this so you can see how getting lighter there. Now we can see a nice distinct line between the colors. That shows that we're getting progressively lighter as we go across. Now what about the intensities? The highest intensity was the yellow, but since the yellow was a darker color, it seems to drop, but it's still the highest intensity. So this is considered high intensity. Then we go over to the violet, which is still fairly violet. If anything, maybe we decide, oh, well, we can get a little bit more intense on that violet. So let's add a little bit more violet into that mixture. Yet we still want to keep it lighter than the yellow. So not to make it too dark, but just make it a little bit more chromatic. All right, so we add some violet into there, a little bit more. Then it drops down to the red, and then finally the green, which is borderline gray green. And that's a well-adjusted color chart. So now you have these colors, you remember the mixture, what it took to get it. What I would suggest you do is you scrape up that color that you mixed and put it into a container or wrap it up in some saran wrap, something that you can keep it clean or keep it moist with. And then you're ready to paint your project.